off with a short film clip.
Well, it's Groundhog Day. Again? Well, it's Groundhog Day. Again?
That covers it, doesn't it? The Farm Bill is certain now to expire without being renewed. The Freedom Caucus would very much like to shut the government down, will probably succeed. A true triumph of hope over experience. The Farm Bill is lost in this mess, and we never seem to learn. I'm sure that our panelists, and we're glad to have them both, will fill us in on all the particulars of passing the Farm Bill. I look forward to their comments about SNAP funding, the chances of a reference price increase, changes in the conservation programs as we move from traditional conservation programs perhaps to more carbon sequestration and soil regeneration. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about how the Farm Bill will approach Proposition 12 and the recent Supreme Court decision. But as for me, I'd like to quickly set the stage for a Farm Bill discussion with a bit of history, and then mention a couple of prospective problems that agriculture might be facing during the time this Farm Bill is in effect. Several years ago, my parents were going through the records my grandfather had accumulated in nearly a century of living and farming. We found his contract for the Department of Agriculture for the Agriculture Adjustment Act of 1933, which is what you see here. Contract was for the 34 crop season. Grandpa promised to cut his corn production 30%. In return, he received a payment of just over $1,000. They assumed that he would have yielded 43 bushels per acre, and the market price on the day he signed the contract was 13 cents a bushel. The Agriculture Adjustment Act was arguably the most important part under the New Deal. Just a quarter of U.S. population lived on the farm in 1933. A program that increased farm income was vital to the performance of the general economy because farm families were such a large part of the population. During the first year of the AAA, farm income rose 30%. The bill was written in 4 days and cleared the House overnight. The Senate held up passage. The bill finally passed when 600 really mad farmers pulled a bankruptcy judge out of a courthouse in Lamars, Iowa, and placed a noose around his neck and a hubcap on his head. I have any idea what the hubcap signified, but the meaning of the noose was pretty clear. Farmers demonstrated because they didn't feel the AAA went far enough. From introduction until passage, it took 2 months to pass the Farm Bill. I'm sure everybody in this room younger than me, which is all of you, is asking, what does this have to do with this year's Farm Bill? Why is he talking about this? And I guess ancient history doesn't have much to do with Farm Bill negotiations today, except the reminder that the first Farm Bill directly affected 25% of the U.S. population. Today, there's about 500,000 or so commercial farmers grossing over $100,000. That's much less than 1% of the working population. Maybe that doesn't matter. We've been worrying about the decline of farmers and a commensurate decline in our political power for a very long time. And so far, we still seem to be able to bring a Farm Bill across the finish line. But I guess it should serve as a reminder to pat your favorite lobbyist on the back and tell her that she's doing a pretty good job. We've been writing farm bills for about 90 years since that first contract with my grandfather. And though I would always argue, especially after hearing that last wonderful presentation, I would always argue that changes in technology and markets have had more to do with where we've come from and where we're going than farm bills. It is important to remember that in 1934, when my grandfather signed that first contract, farm households were about 40% of the average household income. Today, farm households enjoy an income that's around 120% of the U.S. average. Gratitude for the hard work that has gone into 90 years of farm bills is in order. So we've done okay, but I'm worried. Yields have been below trend for the past 4 years. How will the Farm Bill work if we spend the next 4 years above trend? That's not unusual. We've had 3 dry years at home. We're due for a couple of wet years. Neither candidate for president in 2024 cares a whit about increasing trade. And so far, the only economic program I've heard either one mention is to increase tariffs on every import in this country by 10%, which would, of course, quickly lead to retaliation and almost certainly first against agriculture products. It's a policy right out of the 1930s. And as we just learned, in the 1930s, the U.S. government paid my grandfather to kill his pigs. Let's not do that again. Here's the bonus worry. One that, unlike the others, you probably haven't thought of yet. You can call me Eeyore. The country of Norway reported 2 different GDP growth rates for the last reporting period, one without pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk, and one with, had a little trouble pronouncing that. Economic growth with the company for the country of Norway was over 2%. When you didn't include the company, Norway's economy shrank. The value of the company is greater than the GNP of Norway. Novo Nordisk makes 2 drugs, Ozempic and Wegovy. They're diabetic drugs that help with weight loss. They are literally flying off the shelves all around the world at $900 a month at retail cost. 42% of Americans are obese, including me, and a potential market for the drugs. Trials have shown an average weight loss of 15%. Drugs work by cutting caloric intake. If consumers continue to demand the drugs, and they will, absent side effects we don't yet know about, the change in our economy could be large. For example, health insurance costs will be unknowable. They're going to go up because people are going to demand that $900 a month to pay for the drug. Down because there's less heart disease and diabetes. And up because when heart attacks don't kill us, dementia does, and that's even more expensive. The trend, this much is obvious, but I think about prospective changes in restaurant portions, snack consumption, candy sales, and then eventually food demand. These diet drugs will change a bunch of industries, ours included. This can be very good news for our health and our comfort in airline seats, but it may change how much food we can sell as well as what kinds of food. And I haven't even mentioned artificial meat, the Green New Deal, Europe's plan to cut agricultural chemical use by 50%, and the fact that we farmers are all old and most of us are grouchy. Eeyore indeed. So we're going to talk about the Farm Bill, and we've got a great panel here, and we're excited to start off with Congressman Tracey Mann. Congressman Mann has represented the Big First District in Kansas in the U.S. House of Representatives since January 2021. He serves on the House Agriculture, House Transportation and Infrastructure, and House Small Business Committees. Prior to representing the 1st District, Congressman Mann served Kansas as the 50th Lieutenant Governor of the state. He's a 5th-generation Kansan who was born and raised on his family farm just south of Quinter, Kansas. He's a graduate of Kansas State University, and didn't we have a good time at that ball game between my Tigers and your Wildcats?
Oh, man. Oh, man. Well, I think it's good to see everybody. We got an applause, Sharice, before this started. We'll see if we still have an applause when this ends. I did hear your comment about pulling nooses out for members of Congress, so that was not lost on me. Some incredible history that you just laid out there. Hey, Sharice, thank you to the Agribusiness Council of Kansas City and to Agri-Pulse for hosting this event today. Walked in, first person I saw was Shane Oldie. I don't know if Shane's still here. I saw Shane a month ago at our daughter's cross-country meet. So it's good to see him again. And then I go up the stairs and see Karen from Harvesters, who's in my office 2 weeks ago. And then I saw Dr. Featherstone, who was my professor at K-State and my advisor. So a lot of friends here from all over the state. I know all over the multi-state region as well. These are important events as we get together. I saw Congresswoman Davis earlier and really appreciated that you did not bring up the fact that your Jayhawks are 4-0 and ranked ahead of my Wildcats. But it's a fun time of the year, and will be a fun few months for everybody, to say the least. You know, I was driving here, so I live in Salina, Kansas, the middle of Kansas. I was driving here, a little bit surreal, honestly, because I was reflecting on the fact that my great-great-grandfather was a guy named Clarence Winger, who lived in southwest Kansas, and once a year, about as far south in western Kansas as you could get or close to it, but once a year he would drive his cattle, this would be late 1800s, he'd drive his cattle to the railhead, load them up, get on the train with them, come here to Kansas City, sell them, and then he would take his money that he had, he would spend the night at the Mulebach Hotel, which is right next door, and take the train back the next morning. And so, you know, I think about all the ag producers all over our great state and this incredible region. For those of you that don't know, I represent the 1st District of Kansas, which starts about 20 miles west of where we are right here and goes all the way to Colorado. We are the number 11 largest district in the country and the number 3 ag district in the whole country. So if you look at production agriculture, there's 435 districts in Congress. Last year, the 1st District of Kansas produced about $12.5 billion of ag products. The top 3, by the way, are all right about the same. It's the big ag district in western Nebraska. Then there's a big, large ag district in northeastern Iowa as well. But the 1st District of Kansas, number 1 out of 435 congressional districts for beef production, number 1 for wheat production, number 1 for sorghum production, Jesse McCurry, number 7 for corn, and number 11 for dairy. And we're seeing dairy grow, certainly in our state. So for us, you know, agriculture really drives our economy. I think everybody in this room knows that. I want to zoom way out, and then I want to talk about the farm bill a little bit. If I'm going to zoom way out, I just look at our country, right? We're almost 250 years in to this great experiment, which is America. And the fundamental question is, are we able to govern ourselves? Like that's the fundamental question. And I think we forget sometimes that this is still an experiment that is still playing out. When our founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence 247 years ago, they did not realize at that time that the good Lord had dealt our country an ace. If you think about a card game, it's an ace in the fact that the largest area, the largest contiguous plot of farmland in the entire world is protected right in the middle of our country, on the east by the Appalachian Mountains, on the west by the Rocky Mountains, on the north by the expanse that is the Canadian tundra, and on the south by the Gulf of Mexico that's protected by the Caribbean Sea. Oh, and by the way, the longest navigable waterway, not the longest waterway, the longest navigable waterway in the entire world runs right through the middle of the largest patch of farmland in the world. We got an ace. We were dealt an ace as a country. That's ace number 1. Ace number 2, I would argue, is the fact that we later discovered as we industrialized that you have one of the largest deposits of oil and gas in the entire planet that sits generally in that same area. There's some exceptions to that, generally in that same area. So that's ace card number 2. And then ace card number 3, we were given a country where we have the freedom to maximize the value of those resources to the benefit of our citizens. Credible to me. So when you think about it, I get concerned when I see the size of our government growing, as a result, inherently our freedom shrinking, and the impact that that has on the ace cards that we have been dealt. So we zoom way in, which brings me to this farm bill. You know, we forget this, but I would argue that one of the reasons that we are the free country we are is because we have never had to rely on another country for our food supply. I'll say that again. One of the reasons that we are the free country we are is we've never had to rely on another country for our food supply. If we mess that up, in my view, if we move away from modern day production agriculture, like there are those that would like to move away from the oil and gas industry in a too fast, non-market based ways, and we have to start importing our food, we are at an entirely different spot as a nation. Food security is national security, which is why it's incredibly important, in my view, to get this farm bill right. And as we zoom in and look at this farm bill, a handful of quick thoughts, and then happy to get into the questions here in a little bit. But I think we've got to remember that farm bills are 5-year bills for a reason. Long enough to provide some certainty for our producers, but short enough so that we are looking at these policies and making sure that we are updating it and it's changing with the times. There's no question that agriculture inputs today are much higher than they were in 2018. No question, which is why we are having this conversation in the first place. So I want to get that out there. Number two, I would say you've got to remember that the Farm Bill today is 81% food and nutrition, 19% everything else. Again, 81% food and nutrition, 19% everything else. In the everything else bucket are things like crop insurance, market access programs, conservation programs, all of the things that really impact production agriculture. That's what today's Farm Bill looks like, and that's important to keep focused on. And I would just say this, my priorities for this Farm Bill are threefold. Number one, and I appreciated the intro video here, number one is crop insurance. Such an important risk management tool. There's no other business where you have Mother Nature as your business partner. And it's a very successful, crop insurance is a very successful public-private partnership, widely popular, incredibly important for our ag producers. We got to realize that this part of the country, especially as you go farther west, we are low moisture, high risk agriculture. And we have to have tools in place to help us manage that risk on the high plains. So crop insurance is priority for me, number one. Priority number two for me is MAP and FMD, Market Access Program and Foreign Market Development, or trade. The future of agriculture lies in us continuing to expand markets overseas, to grow the demand for all of our ag products, which I would argue are superior to anywhere in the world. So continue to lean in on trade through MAP and FMD, incredibly important. And then number three is ag research. You look at our universities, you look at all the efforts on ag research, we are falling way behind China and other countries when you look at the dollars that we invest in research, innovation. The chair of the House Ag Committee has been quoted many times as saying innovation needs to lead this Farm Bill. I wholeheartedly agree. And by the way, when we invest in ag research, it helps our colleges and universities. It also helps our ag producers here. It also helps other ag producers all over the world because we're able to export, expand upon that technology as well. So those are some introductory thoughts. Look forward to our conversation, and thank you all for having me here this afternoon. Good to meet you.
Thank you. And our second panelist is Representative Sharice Davids. Congresswoman Davids was first elected to represent Kansas's 3rd District in 2018, becoming one of the first 2 Native American women ever to serve in Congress. She was re-elected in 2020. Representative Davids serves as the Vice Chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and is a member of the House Small Business and Agriculture Committees. She attended Johnson County Community College and the University of Missouri, Kansas City, before earning a law degree from Cornell Law School. Please help me welcome Representative Sharice Davids.
Thank you. I don't know which thing I'm talking into. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, it's afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sharice Davids. I represent the Kansas 3rd. You already did my intro, so I don't need to do all that. I really appreciate getting the chance to be here and join you for my first Agriculture Business Council and Agri-Pulse Outlook Forum. I appreciate you, Blake, for not just moderating, but I liked the Eeyore. I mean, you know what I mean. I appreciate the honesty and the candor about how folks are feeling, actually. I think it's really important to just, keep it as real as possible here. I do serve on, so actually it's funny because in my notes, it's like, oh, I'm on the House Ag Committee with Congressman Mann. We're actually on all of the committees together on small business and transportation and infrastructure and now ag. So I'm really excited that both of us get to serve on that committee because in light of a farm bill, a must-pass piece of legislation like the farm bill, being reauthorized this year, I think it's helpful to have multiple voices from our state sharing priorities and that sort of thing. This has also traditionally been, it's probably on there, I don't know, I'm a Democrat. I could just put it out there. So it's been a bipartisan piece of legislation historically, and so I also think it's really important to have Democrats from states like Kansas serving on committees like the Ag Committee, also transportation and infrastructure, particularly because of some of the, and Congressman Mann talked about this, the importance of our infrastructure and logistics and that expertise that exists in this area, whether it's rail, our roads, our navigable waters. All of these things are really important to literally the entire country, and so I do think that while I'm not going to stand here and pretend that that we're in agreement on everything, I know we're not, but I can tell you that when it comes to trying to figure out ways to make sure that this farm bill is going to be one that best serves the state of Kansas and our region, I do think that Congressman Mann and I are both very, very interested in not just getting the farm bill done, but also making sure that that we get it across the finish line in a bipartisan way. So I feel like I do have some stuff in my notes about why the farm bill is important, and it feels silly saying that stuff to you guys because you know. In fact, y'all are probably a lot of the reason why I know about the protections that it provides for farmers and all the various programs that exist, and then also with the upcoming expiration, I am, of course, deeply concerned about not just the timeliness of us getting the farm bill across the finish line, but also making sure that we are able to keep the government open. And while right now it would appear that we, as the Ag Committee, are not on track to have a farm bill reauthorization done by September 30th, I do hope that folks know that there is a sense of urgency amongst folks on the Agriculture Committee in both the House and the Senate. There is a certain sense of urgency to make sure that we get this thing done. I think that anytime there's politics involved in a process, it can get interesting, messy, maybe we could call it messy. But I do think that we're very fortunate to have a very capable chairman. We've got some folks on the Ag Committee who are newer, like myself, but we also have some folks like Congressman Lucas who have been active and participated in getting many farm bills across the finish line. So I am encouraged when I see that. And I think one of the things I totally skipped over was letting you guys know what I've been doing to get myself up to speed on how important the Farm Bill is to the Kansas 3rd and also for the state of Kansas. And I don't know, I'm so sorry, I can't remember if it was already said, but the Kansas 3rd does now include all of it. It's always included all of Johnson County, but it is a portion of Wyandotte County, all of Miami County, Anderson County, and Franklin County. And one of the things that I quickly realized once the district lines were set was that I had a lot of learning to do, that it was going to have to be a really thoughtful and intentional effort to make sure that I understood the needs and concerns and issues of folks in in the newly drawn 3rd district, because there were a lot more farmers and producers and folks who are more engaged with the agriculture sector, which is obviously the biggest sector in the state of Kansas. I also recognize I'm standing in Missouri, but I might keep saying here, meaning Kansas. And also, fun tidbit, I quit my job here as a banquet bartender at this hotel to go to law school. So I've served lots of drinks to people in this very room. Everyone here looks to be doing just fine, and I wouldn't cut anybody in here off that I can tell. But I have had to do that before. Hello, PBR. So one thing I do want to just kind of like mention, I've had the chance to visit with like a pretty wide variety of farmers and producers and folks who are just actively boots on the ground doing the day in, day out work, whether it's farms. I went to a livestock auction. I didn't buy anything. Luckily, they wouldn't let me. Mostly, I mean my team. They're like, you're not coming home with a bull. I visited a co-op, vegetable farm, a goat farm. I'm learning the difference between all the different types of cows. I'm very much looking forward to going to seeing what happens at the World Dairy Expo in Madison, because we've got some folks from the 3rd district competing up there. The FFA, actually, one of the things I wanted to touch on, I promise I'm going to stop in just a second, is I think that when Congressman Mann was talking about one of the reasons that our country has managed to be so successful and so amazing is that we have not been dependent on other countries for our food supply. And in addition to so many of the things, making sure that we keep protecting crop insurance, making sure that our farmers and producers are able to truly make a living while feeding the world. One of the other things that I've gotten the chance to do is visit with like FFA students. And I think that the more young people we can get interested in and excited about agriculture and the ag space, it's just better for our country, because there's so many young people who don't recognize where our food comes from, and I think that's a really important part of the fabric of our country. And so it's like really exciting to see how many FFA and 4-H clubs and all that kind of stuff there are out there. So I've gotten to visit folks at different high schools doing that. And then also I do want to touch on the nutrition programs, because particularly in our area, I know there's, I've gotten to go to Olathe the elementary school and do like serve lunches, because there's a lot of kids who depend on some of the nutrition programs, whether they're in the Farm Bill or in other areas. But the nutrition programs help feed a lot of people. And so we're going to do the panel discussion. I'm looking forward to the questions, but I have very similar priorities to what Congressman Mann said. We got to make sure we protect crop insurance, increasing investment. Oh, I've been cut off. Just kidding. Increasing investments in agricultural research, and certainly in this area, we know that that's a really important thing. And then, the USDA programs need to be as effective and efficient as possible for the farm programs to actually be working in the way that they're intended to work. And then, just making sure that that the nutrition programs do what they're intended to do. So I'm going to stop there so we can get to the questions. Right. Thank you. Thanks, Blake.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, we'll be glad to open it up for questions. And my first question I had is actually appeared in a much more clever way on the screen. So I would ask both of our panelists, which is more likely,
Oh, they can't see the question.
You know, I'm going to read it to him, yeah. Because that way, if we get a bad question, we'll skip it, okay? All right. Which is most likely, K-State wins the Big 12, Chiefs win the Super Bowl, or a farm bill gets passed before our really drop-dead deadline at the end of the year? So we'll start with you.
That's a good question.
I know. I didn't know this was, I don't want to say the most controversial thing I've ever said in my life. Man, I don't know. I almost feel like I should recuse myself from this question because I've already bet on the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl.
Okay.
I can't, I mean, I live on the Kansas side. It's legal. I mean, I'm going to hedge on the Farm Bill getting passed this year and say that so much of it's going to depend on what happens with the. I mean, because I have no clue what's going to happen with the the broader government funding. And to me, even though I know there's still a couple sticky points with the Farm Bill generally, I think the biggest thing on the timeline has to do with the government funding. So I'm going to go with all three with a hedge on Farm Bill.
Okay.
Does that?
You're going to rank them in that order, huh? K-State wins the Big 12, number one. We'll let Tracey answer that
What an
question.
impossible
Yeah, you do
question.
this.
Why isn't KU on there, by the way? Whoever came up with that.
Because I went to Missouri.
I think all three are going to happen. Here's the deal. Okay, so we're dancing around, timing of the Farm Bill, which I know is what everyone is of interest in. Us too, frustrated. It's not done yet. Should be. We've got to get it done. We also got to get it right. Both things incredibly important. And it's a three-legged race, right? So I have kids, the last day of school, they do a three-legged race. You get to Congress and realize these things, it's the House side, but also the Senate side. So it's a three-legged race with the Senate. So a lot of it depends on their timing. What we're hearing is that text from the Senate side, potentially released here in November, is potentially what we're hearing. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Senate. That's just what we've heard. I think on the House side, is farther along and could move quite a bit faster than that if need be. Understand, so the Farm Bill expires September 30th, and then we blow through that. Between October 1 and December 31st, the end of the year, there are 19 what's called orphan programs. It basically means these are programs, they're important, but they're much smaller in size and scope and impact than practically everything else in the Farm Bill. Don't forget, January 1 rolls around. Food and nutrition, 81% of the Farm Bill is mandatory. Crop insurance is also mandatory. But come January 1, we go off the dairy cliff, and we have some other very, very significant issues that are important for lenders, or for our producers. Also, don't forget, and we'll wrap up, that Farm Bills are technically amendments to 1940s and 1930s area farm policy. Incredibly important, because that means that even in the dysfunction we're seeing in Washington, D.C., no one I'm talking to has the desire to revert back. It's not like these programs go away. They revert back to 1930s and 1940s era policy, which nobody wants. So certainly if things don't come together with the Farm Bill by the end of the year, there will be some sort of an extension in some form or fashion, which is incredibly important. So.
Okay, one of the controversies before we started talking about a government shutdown was SNAP funding. As I understand it, there was an agreement made, to raise the debt limit on spending for the year. Now there's controversy whether we're going to change those numbers. I guess I'll ask Representative Mann, if we fund the government and get through that hurdle, is there still going to be a controversy over SNAP spending before the Farm Bill's done?
Yes, there will be controversy. I mean, that is not, when you look at where agreement is or is not, there is still, I would say, disagreement on behalf of some members of Congress, I'm going to speak for everybody, on what those levels are. So I think that continues to be part of the conversation. And when it's 81% of the funding, how would it not be? Right. So it's just when you talk about the Farm Bill, 81% now is on the food nutrition side. Whether those amounts are where they should be or not, that's for Congress to decide. But I definitely think those conversations will continue here moving forward.
Do you want to speak to that, or?
Only in that I had, maybe this is my being a little bit naive because it's my first farm bill. And not just like on the Ag Committee, it's my first farm bill. In like the big picture even, is that I had hoped that when we passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act, that that it would just mean that there would be a little less, because there were some of the additional work requirements and that sort of thing in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, that I had hoped that at least that would get us through the Farm Bill reauthorization. But I mean, it's a perennial argument that happens between, and it's also not even just an argument between Democrats and Republicans. It's like, some of it is like some Democrats want to see much higher funding, and so there's intra-party dynamics that are at play even for the nutrition programs as well. So it's not, I guess it's not surprising that there's going to constantly be an argument. I just had hoped that in this Congress, with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, that it would be maybe tamped down a little bit.
Okay, you guys can see the plans. We're gonna go to the H2A question after my next question, which is reference prices. Any change?
Yep. I'm optimistic. We'll see. I think all that's going to play out. Certainly there's a strong desire on my part and a lot of people's part. You look at reference prices, and again, this is why farm bills are 5-year bills, so you open them up and they should reflect the times. Clearly, no one would look and say the current reference prices are what they, reflect modern day prices. There's going to be a big effort to make changes, increases there. How much money there ends up being, what that looks like is all going to play out here in this process.
I think it's so funny. This is like probably the most nervous I've been in a while, except when I did the KC baby thing at the KC Current game. Because I was like, if I mess that up, I'm gonna look real dumb. But this reference pricing is something that I have really, truly just started learning about. And I think that whatever ends up happening in the negotiation with reference pricing, there's a couple of things that I can tell you I'm going to do. Like, first, I'm going to call like the Farm Bureau folks that I've been visiting with, and talk to a bunch of the folks who are from the different commodity groups too, and in this region. And then I've already actually talked to Rep. Mann. I was going to say Tracey, but I feel like I should
Tracey.
call you the okay. About making sure that I understand what the impact of any changes on reference pricing would be statewide, because of just recognizing that there's, he has like more than half the state, I think. So yeah, just trying to make sure that I have a good understanding, because the last thing I want to do is anything that would be a detriment to our region and to Kansas farmers.
Real quick on that. So I would just say, we got to acknowledge, there's a farm safety nets out there, and it was set up 5 years ago to be a certain height off the floor, call it 3 feet. And that's, reference prices playing all these programs. It was, built to withstand a fall off of a 10-foot fall. If you double input costs and you're falling from 20 feet, you could still be a producer, do everything right, hit the safety net, and still hit the ground and do serious damage. And so I think reference prices are in the context of this overall conversation of where should the safety net be and what's the appropriate height off the ground to maximize production in this country. And that's the conversation that will continue, in my view, to play out.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question from the audience. While we're waiting, I added this, while we're waiting on those autonomous tractors, we have challenges with ag labor in the HDA programs, H2A, excuse me, temporary ag workers. Will the Farm Bill take this head on?
I know there's been, so even though I haven't been on the Ag Committee, in my previous 2 sessions of Congress, I've worked with, in a bipartisan way with folks to try to figure out a way to address the H-2A visa issues, because I think that, anytime we start talking about anything related to visas, green cards, anything in this space, it opens up a whole ball of wax that sometimes gets derailed a bit. But I think the H-2A program is specifically one where I know I've pushed for things like making sure that we're actually issuing or releasing all of the visas that are available that have been allocated, that we're looking at ways to make it easier for folks who have returning workers, making it easier for folks who have there's just so many, the lottery systems that folks have to deal with, just getting rid of some of that, those barriers to people actually getting the help they need. And so, but I don't know that will be something that makes it into the Farm Bill this time.
Yeah, a huge issue, high priority for me, something obviously that impacts all of agriculture, dairies, feed yards, all of our producers. I would say likely not, and here's why. You get into jurisdictional issues with what the Farm Bill can and cannot handle. For example, preserving the stepped-up basis, making sure the Farm Bill, farm killer tax, producers are protected by that. That has to go through the Ways and Means Committee, not the Farm Bill. I'd like to get into the Farm Bill, year-round E15 for ethanol. That's in the jurisdiction of the Energy and Commerce Committee, so that's not in there. And I think you're going to find it's going to be the same with immigration. That said, which is discouraging. That said, on the encouraging side, so every committee in Congress can have up to 6 subcommittees or task force. The Ag Committee has 5 subcommittees, and that vacant slot, if you will, the chairman has created an Ag Workforce Task Force. Equal number of Republicans and Democrats. As I view this Congress, I think if anything significant gets done to help Ag immigration overall, it's going to come out of that group. They are meeting. Congress actually can't walk and chew gum despite the Farm Bill. Those conversations are ongoing, and if that's something to be watching for, if anything is able to get done politically on immigration, it's going to come out of that task force, and they should be having a report here by the end of the year on some specific action items that ought to be taken to help this farm workforce shortage that we have.
And I think that you touched on 2 things that we've kind of signed on together on. One is the E15 year-round. I think we did a delegation letter together. So see, bipartisan stuff happens. Because if you watch the news, it feels like it never happens. And then on the workforce issues, H-2A and H-2B, basically things that are going to help us address the workforce shortages that we're seeing, and areas where there are folks who know how to do this. They're working with folks who have been coming and working with them for 12 seasons or 15 seasons in a row. And so I do think that on some of those issues, we can get bipartisan support to get that stuff done.
The chairman has talked earlier about a fix for Prop 12 in the Farm Bill. I know there's been a letter circulated opposing that. Will the Farm Bill address California's Proposition 12?
We'll see. I would love for it to. I think that's going to be ruled unconstitutional. I'm all for states' rights, but the reason that you have these intercommerce clauses, you don't have different rules for different states, and that's absolutely what California is trying to do. Very bad for ag producers. I would like to see a fix of that included. potentially we're going to run into some of these jurisdictional issues, so we will have to see, regardless of that, it's being challenged in courts. I'm optimistic the Supreme Court will hear that case and throw that out. That said, there's also other legislative fixes out there that are outside of the Farm Bill that look like they're going to move forward and get some traction. We will see. Big issue in my view.
I would say, I know that there have been efforts to get kind of like a marker bill, the EATS Act, included in the Farm Bill. I feel like I have to keep being like, I'm also a lawyer. Sorry. Recovering. And there's like a little bit, and some of it has to do with jurisdictional issues and that sort of thing around the way that that bill is specifically written. But yeah, I have a feeling that actually we're probably not in too different of a place on that, and wanting to make sure that that we don't have particular. I would hate to see states being able to do things that would impinge on the ability of farmers and ranchers and producers in other states to do the best practices that they have. But I'm not opposed to it in principle. It's just wanting to make sure that we get the language right.
Okay. And the final question we'll take is, what is your position on taking traditional conservation money and transferring it to climate programs? Is that happening? Will it happen? Just a little talk about, I mean, a lot of money came into to agriculture in the IRA and other bills for conservation work and conservation programs. I'm not sure how that's going to mesh with the Farm Bill. Talk about it. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, well, one of the things that I think is so interesting, and that I kind of, I feel like this is probably some conversations that I need to be having with folks on my side of the aisle. Oh, I'm all. Is just making sure that the way this question is worded, it's kind of like there's tons of conservation work and taking care of the land that's happening on farms already. And I don't think that we should be, in some ways, I think that sometimes not out of malice, but maybe a lack of understanding about what's going on, is that we've got members of Congress who might see one incident or bad actor and assume that farmers and ranchers are not trying to be good stewards of the land. What farmers are out there making it so that their kids can't inherit the farm? And so I do think that there's an element of education that needs to happen with some members of Congress around what it would mean to take conservation money and programs that are actually widely used and effective, taking money out of those programs and putting it into something else. I think that there's, I just think that there's a lot of education that needs to happen based on the little bit of stuff that I've been learning. Yeah, so I actually think that we should make sure that the conservation programs are protected and that they're being funded properly.
Yeah, so I would oppose taking money from traditional conservation programs, putting them towards climate things. I think if anything happens on the climate front, it's incredibly important to me that we got to make sure that it's producer-driven and that producers benefit from whatever maybe gets set up. And there also needs to be an acknowledgement that, ag producers are the original conservationists of the land. Name another industry that is taking carbon out of the air through photosynthesis and turning it into food, right? Like that's what agriculture is. And by the way, agriculture's contributions to greenhouse gas emissions has declined greatly over the last 25 years, all through market-based voluntary actions. And so I would strongly oppose any effort by the federal government to, in a heavy-handed nature, step in and try to force ag producers to do things that would make them less profitable or would not acknowledge what is already being done by our grain producers.
All right. Thank you to Representative David. Thank you to Representative